Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for December 21, 2025. Today we're talking with diplomat and former Ambassador Dziunik Aghajanian. Ambassador Aghajanian, welcome back. Great to have you on the Groong podcast.
Thank you for inviting.
You seem to be a great favorite of our listeners. We are very happy to have you back.
I'm happy to hear that.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with Ukraine because in the past week there have been a couple of updates on this front, and then we'll move over to the domestic affairs. So on the battlefield, Ukrainian troops seem to be withdrawing from the town of Siversk. So their battlefronts seem to be collapsing. There are shortages of manpower, weaponry, even power outages in various places. And now European sources even are not lying about this stuff. French President Emmanuel Macron agreed to hold discussions with Putin, and this is a flip from his own hawkish stand only a few weeks ago. Macron has also essentially blocked German Chancellor Merz's initiative to confiscate Russian assets and continue funding the Ukraine war with that. And many European sources are reporting this as Macron has betrayed Merz. Macron is even lobbying Merz to reopen dialogue with Russia to procure nuclear power for some of their German nuclear power plants. And finally, a Russian lieutenant general, Vanil Sarvarov, was assassinated with a car bomb in Moscow over the weekend. Russia suspects Ukrainian special ops, but there's nothing from Ukraine on this thing. So, first of all, with this language of Macron betraying Merz, what does it actually betray? Is it a deep-seated disunity, division inside the EU, especially as it comes regarding the war in Ukraine? What is this a symptom of?
Well, first, I don't think there is any betrayal. It's just they are calculating their positioning with regards to the coming developments. It is understandable for them that the Ukrainian front will not last long. At least they are trying to do their utmost using the Russian frozen assets to finance it. But even that is already deepening the divide between the European countries because they know that afterwards they will suffer worse consequences from the Russian side, also through different kind of court cases that will be devastating for the overall economy of the European countries because let's be honest, Europe and also London have been so far the haven for the finances from all over the world, being considered as the honest and safe banking uh, places where you can keep your money, and that is also true for many countries. So the Middle Eastern countries, the Asian countries, some African countries will be giving a second thought whether to keep have their money still in the same position or move it to other much safer places, which will just kill the European economy because we know that the Ukrainian war has suffocated European economy and brought it to its knees. And now with the finances also flowing out of Europe, it will just be maybe the death march for the European Union, definitely, and very deadly blow for the individual countries. So they are already starting to position themselves so that at the right moment they can showcase themselves at the winners table rather than at the losers table. And many analysts give the example of the end of the World War II when I don't remember which general, but when he saw French generals also at the table of the winners, he was surprised knowing that the French leadership was very supportive of Hitler's actions. So I think overall we will see this tendency of one step forward, two steps backward, in the coming months, and the most important developments will come in the spring when I think, with the blessing of the British and other very hawkish European countries, another attempt will be made in the Ukrainian front to change the situation, but I don't think it's going to be very useful. And the current terrorist attacks on different military personnel and also facilities within Russia, deep in the Russian country, in the state, is also evidence that they are using very dirty methods to gain some support towards changing the Russian position over the Ukrainian negotiations. So this is I think what is being cooked there. And as the situation gets worse, we will see more countries trying to get as much as possible from the situation by starting some kind of indirect or secret negotiations with Russians so that they can safeguard themselves after the real fall of Ukraine and some kind of a paper being signed to put a full stop to this terrible adventure that took millions of lives.
Yeah, as the collapse of the Ukrainian fronts are coming closer, it seems like the stakes are getting higher. Would you say that this is precipitating a further division or further consolidation within Europe to come to an agreement as to how to end this conflict? Because so far they've been extremely hawkish. They've avoided all kinds of solutions to come to an agreement with Russia. So I'm just wondering if the collapse of these fronts is bringing Europe to actually come to a solution.
No, it's not going to bring to consolidation. It's going to deepen the divide between European countries. But as we say in Armenian, just European countries, especially those that were hoping for to grasp a big piece from deconstruction of Russia, and they failed in their hopes. I think those countries understand the consequences of and the negotiations that are being conducted without any consideration of their interest, and they are simply trying to sell themselves at a higher cost so that they can have their seat at the table in the coming world order. Let's not forget that two of the members of the UN Security Council are within the European Union, European continent, and part of the most supportive countries to Ukraine. And with a changing world order, they might just be thrown out of the Security Council. So they are trying to safeguard their future positions by playing this kind of a hawkish, hard game and trying to keep Ukraine fighting, hoping that at the end of the day, there will be something thrown to themselves as a compromise for their agreement to stop financing and supporting Ukraine.
What kind of outcomes do you see at present on the Ukraine front itself? Is Russia feeling confident enough of the outcome there? And do you see it turning more of its attention towards other places like the South Caucasus?
Well, Russia is confident of the outcome. I think they have surpassed the hardest part, and they know how to overcome certain very difficult constructs that have been put there with the support of NATO countries. But I don't think that Russia has turned fully to other regions yet. Of course, Russia is very concerned about the developments in the South Caucasus, especially in Armenia, because it will directly hit Russia and open doors for other hotspots to be instigated that would put Russia in very dangerous situation. and Russia is doing everything not to allow those developments to go further, be it in the South Caucasus or in Central Asia. But unfortunately, at the given situation, Russia cannot act very directly and very the way they used to, in a very stubborn way. So they are trying to be more soft policy oriented, trying to keep the people of those countries still within their orbit, knowing well what the leadership is doing.
Okay, Dziunik, let's bring it back to Armenia and right directly to internal politics. Pashinyan has publicly denied that the Armenian state is campaigning against the church, yet he has framed it as a personal endeavor, as a alleged Christian, alleged follower of the Armenian Apostolic Church. Yet events last week around Holy Etchmiadzin provided, I would say, yet another proof of a coordinated state pressure and a coordination of the state around this issue. 10 renegade archbishops announced plans to enter Etchmiadzin during an evening worship service to push for the Catholicos' resignation. Or in their own words, they said that to send him to rest. Pashinyan's posturing around this was very interesting. He said, the government, this is not a government initiative, but he openly supported the issue. And at the same time, authorities sent National Security Service NSS agents to monitor liturgies and block the mentioning of Catholicos' name. They have the authorities have withheld help in reclaiming seized church property. For instance, the Hovanavank monastery, which has been seized from the church, and they provide regularly security to the pro-Pashinyan clergy, like they did in Etchmiadzin. So plainclothes agents, identified later as Red Berets, along with police units, escorted the bishops and this priest, Stepan Asatryan, who arrived in a car with removed license plates and also escort vehicles to Etchmiadzin. So it was a very big commotion. But despite this backing, this overt backing by the state, the group of renegade bishops was confronted by 5 to 10,000 supporters of the Catholicos, underscoring the depth of the public resistance to this issue. And as a result, the bishops weren't able to enter the church where the service was being performed by the Catholicos. How would you characterize what happened last Thursday? And do you think that this is a rare victory for the people and the opposition over Pashinyan?
I don't think it's a rare victory. It was a logical outcome of the situation, given the attitude towards the church and the Catholicos in the country. Everyone understands that this is Pashinyan-initiated adventure, which aims to bring church to its knees and make it as adaptable to his own orders and wishes as possible. And it falls in the same line with the demands of coming from Turkey and Azerbaijan. And the main purpose for it is also to ensure that there is no resistance from wherever in the coming elections or with regards to the coming concessions that is being currently prepared for Azerbaijan and Turkey. So no matter what Pashinyan says, everybody understands that it is his initiative, it is his goal, and it is aimed at the church, it's not a personal or individual liking or disliking of this or that clergy. It is aimed at the destruction of the Armenian church as one of the pillars for the Armenian identity and Armenian resistance, not only in Armenia, but also in diaspora. So he is not going to give up. What happened last Sunday, it was a trial, a testing of how successful they would be. and also trying to show as if he has nothing to do, but it's an internal church discussion that is being brought out into the public. And I think he's going to continue with it, using all the leverages that the authorities have. And here I would mention that state has nothing to do with it. It's just the government and the person sitting as the one ruling currently the country. It has nothing to do with the state, and everybody in Armenia also puts a line between state and Pashinyan's government, and also his actions with regards to the church as part of his very long-standing position to kind of reshape the Armenian identity into something of Turkish liking, or something that will be very shapeless and unable to resist whatever is coming as a demand from outside. So the hardest part is yet to come. If I'm not mistaken, the rumors are he's going to have another attack on Etchmiadzin this coming Sunday, and I hope that the people will stand as support to the church as it has shown for the past months. And I think the understanding in the public is growing that this has nothing to do with whatever compromises or whatever cooked information is being thrown into the public to justify their actions. So I think this is what is happening here.
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean that the state has nothing to do with it, because I believe the legitimate interests of the state depend on a strong identity and association with the Armenian Church, given that the Armenian state is one of the first in the world to have adopted Christianity as its official
Yes.
religion. But I think it's important to highlight that state resources and in a not insignificant way are being used against in this persecution of the church,
which is also illegal. Which is also
Yes.
illegal. Both the actions, the attempt, the intent, and the way it is being conducted, everything is illegal according to Armenian legislation and requirements of international law. So this is totally an illegal action, and it only serves the demands of coming from Turkey and Azerbaijan.
Yeah. So a day after that disgraceful incident in Etchmiadzin, Civic AM, a site linked to Pashinyan, and especially his aide, Taron Chahoyan, published a purportedly declassified, in quotes, KGB document alleging that the Catholicos' brother, Archbishop Yezras, who is currently serving in Russia, has collaborated with and he's part of the Armenian Church in Russia. Let me just clarify. Had collaborated with the KGB in 1986 to 1988, a period when Armenia was part of the USSR. And I would say that cooperation with state bodies was widely seen, perhaps as normal or even patriotic. But this claim loosely tracks Pashinyan's own prior talking points. Pashinyan has accused the Catholicos of being sort of, associated with the Russian or foreign intelligence. And I think the hint was that he's associated with the Russian KGB, although no proof has been furnished so far regarding the Catholicos himself. Anyway, this document that was, I don't even want to say declassified because it seems like an obvious fake. It had multiple anomalies. It lacks like standard KGB details. We have seen other documents leaked from the KGB, and in all those, everything is completely filled out, like the birth date, nationality. KGB documents, Russian was the state language in 1986 before the fall of the USSR. So all documents would be expected to be in Russian. Yet this one appears to be in Armenian. And curiously, for a 40-year-old document, it appeared to be very, very white, if I may say so myself. I remember that.
It's an A4 paper.
Yes, it's I remember I have some documents from that time myself. Not even that time. I have some documents that I personally handwrote in the 2000s related to, like, Groong even. Like, it was interesting. I plan to share it one day, but they have become all yellow, and I've been having trouble trying to figure out how to keep it white. But here, I guess. The KGB has some special technology to archive those documents. Anyway, so despite all the red flags that this is a forgery, let's assume the document is real. For 1 second, let's just humor Pashinyan. Is collaborating with intelligence agencies of your state a crime now? And what does this alleged collaboration from 1986 to 1988 by the brother of the Catholicos have anything to do with the Catholicos himself more than 40 years after the fact?
Well, let me also take this up then. I don't believe that collaborating with your state against your people is ever any good. How would you feel about
Uh,
people who are collaborating with Pashinyan's government and spying on the people and turning you over because you haven't done anything wrong, but you've done something that Pashinyan doesn't like? Is that a good
so
thing?
I think that yes, there are differences, different flavors of collaboration, but I don't think the Soviet state, the Soviet leadership in the 1980s was essentially an occupational regime like the Armenian government is. I would
I
say
don't.
collaborating with, for instance, like the argument I would bring is Vichy France. Yes, I think collaborating with the Vichy government in France would be against your
Yes,
people
but
would be
the
bad.
Germans were basically an occupational government, right? The Vichy was an
So is the
occupational government.
Pashinyan
Well,
regime.
but
Yeah.
the
So
Soviet
you brought
regime was not an occupational one. Theoretically,
exactly.
Armenia and all
That's
the
my
other
point.
states joined the Union.
Yeah. So that's my point. Yes, exactly.
Well, I think it's a philosophical discussion, and if we have a negative attitude towards recruiting agents, then it means all the secret services will be closed and nobody will be conducting any intelligence services. As you rightfully mentioned, it's an obvious falsification. Even the font, the font by which it is printed, it is a Microsoft Word generated font, and it is obvious that couldn't have been existed in 80s because then anybody who has ever filled a document in during the Soviet time, they remember that the forms were coming out from the printing houses ready-made, and you were filling it, and you were right, the paper itself was yellowish, it was never white. So it was a special printing, and if I'm not mistaken, certain printing houses were only allowed to print those forms that were supposed to be filled every single line fully, not abbreviations, not missing anything. You couldn't have missed any sentence or any position. Even if it didn't exist, you had to write there that it is not applicable. And I think it's the same with any other normal country filling any document. This is an obvious forgery. So what it intended to do, I think it was in preparation for first arresting Yezras Sarpazan when he was supposed to come and join the Episcopal Council meeting. And that was one of the threats that made the Catholicos to reconsider having the council at that time, because then all the diocesan bodies will be left without their leaders, and it would have been easier to kill the church and its leadership. Secondly, I think what they were trying to manipulate is the general negative attitude of the people in Armenia towards any agent. And the KGB agent labeling is being used to to have this kind of negative attitude towards Yezra Sarpazan grow in the public with its shadow being thrown over the Catholicos and justifying their actions, which he actually mentioned in one of his interviews, that it would be considered as a security threat. So indirectly getting to Catholicos and possibly trying to arrest him, or at least threaten with arrest to Catholicos. You know, I don't know how these security services work internally, but I think during the Soviet time, especially with the position that the clergy were working outside of the country, that was also part of the rule, that they had to have some kind of a working relationship with the intelligence services of the country. And Yezra Sarpazan was posted in Germany, and that is where this whole, I think, rumor started to spread. Nobody knows whether there was any truth to that, but I remember even during my student times, there were rumors that in certain faculties, if you, especially in the Faculty of Oriental Languages, if you wanted to be able to work outside of the country, which was part of the work that the translators were doing, you were forced to sign an agreement with the security services so that they could trust you and they have some kind of a control over you, and you don't become an agent for a double agent for a foreign country. It's a very difficult thing to consider. But let's go to the total aim of this rumor being spread. First, to have some kind of a legitimate justification for the arrest of Yezra Sarpazan once he steps into Armenia. Secondly, to have this kind of a agent-related indirect accusations towards Catholicos and the clergy in the church. And thirdly, to attempt to get some kind of a negative attitude towards certain members of the church, hoping that it will help garner the public support towards his actions. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. In the background, as I'm thinking about all of this, of course, we established that the National Security Service has not, I believe, come out and said this is an authentic document, if I'm not mistaken. But at the same time, they have not said this is inauthentic. They have not denied it. And we see
well,
the
it has been published in the media that is directly related to the political party that Pashinyan is leading.
Yeah.
So it's like their publishing house in that sense, and every even statement nowadays coming out on behalf of the archbishops and bishops is being published there, and nobody knows. Even the language has changed, and it becomes obvious that it's been written in the administration or in the backyards of Pashinyan administration and simply being published there so that it goes into the public. It is just the media that is being used for their own purposes.
But my point was, so someone at the National Security Service has to quietly sit on their hands and watch what's happening and not say anything, tacitly approving or agreeing with these policies. Not just the release of this forgery, or let's say, even if it's real, whatever, not saying not anything about it, but at the same time, sending their agents to dioceses, to churches across Armenia and saying, don't you mention the Catholicos' name when Pashinyan is there. I mean...
Well, let's remember that they all report to Pashinyan.
Of course,
yes.
And
they're following orders.
Absolutely.
Simply. The
they're
justification given is they're following orders, which is not a justification because it's beyond their functioning responsibilities. It totally goes beyond. But nobody, they have decreased the role of the National Security Service.
That was what I was leading at.
Yeah, they created this kind of a intelligence service upon which a lady is sitting, and it's being fully, if I'm not mistaken, Even some British experts are working there. So it's under foreign occupation, I would say. So there's nothing in our national security service that serves our nation currently. It is just serving the orders coming from above, and those that do not agree and cannot stand it anymore, they just get out of the system. So a lot of valuable professionals have left the system, and it shows. They have become, the joke is, I don't know whether you remember or not. You remember when he was asking the National Security Service to search for the devil?
Yes.
And yeah, it's just a joke. I mean, he's treating them as simply stick that he's using to hit this or that institution, given that many people still don't want to deal with them and don't want to find themselves in different kind of jails. So this is simply what is being. It's terror on the state level, I would say. And he is using all the institutions that work with him, and many in there they don't agree to what is happening, but they say we have to feed our families, and we can't do anything else. It's a moral thing. Now we're getting into this moral stage when following orders becomes too dangerous, with church and with belief and with God. But getting into the scene of attacking your own church is really very psychologically very difficult for many people. And I hope this will make them rethink their actions.
Ambassador, let's talk a little bit about the flourishing economic trade activity between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Where do you find it?
Where do we find it? Well,
Yes.
it's in the
It's in the civil contract newspapers. Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Where do
right.
you find
That's
it?
right. Well, if you listen to Pashinyan, his government greeted with heavy publicity what it called the first bilateral commercial transaction with Azerbaijan in decades,
Yeah.
marked by the arrival of Azerbaijani fuel to Armenia via Georgia, with reports that companies linked to Gurzo, this is the government-linked oligarch Khachadur Sukyasyan, and he will apparently distribute the gasoline locally through his outlets. Armenia's fuel supply has traditionally come from Iran and Russia. And when he turns to the West, Pashinyan tells about reducing Armenia's dependence on Russia. When he turns east, for example, he discussed the deal at the Eurasian Economic Union last week, and he declared it as an early peace dividend tied to the transport and logistic cooperation under the August 8 Washington framework. This narrative, however, raises basic questions that point to a political gesture rather than a market transaction. Georgia granted a one-time waiver of transit fees, and Armenia and Azerbaijan still lack any kind of a format for relations to govern contracts and disputes and insurance or anything, as a matter of fact. Yeah, nothing. The result has been, well, there has been a one-time arrival of a fuel shipment, but there's been a broad public backlash about this, with many Armenians asking whether decades of war, heavy losses, 5,000 people lost, the abandonment of Artsakh were all for cheap oil from Azerbaijan, or presumably cheap oil from Azerbaijan. So how do you see this? Is this a commerce-driving peace, or is this a political theater?
No, it's a political theater, and everybody understands it's a political theater with the main purpose of showing that they really have achieved some kind of a peace, and he will be using it in the coming elections for its campaigning. It's just a political theater. Let's not forget that the kind of petrol that is being imported from Azerbaijan, even Azerbaijan is importing this petrol. He doesn't have enough for his own resources. He's importing it from Russia and Iran, and it seems that we are just filling the coffers of Azerbaijan by having the same Russian and Iranian oil or petrol being transported through Azerbaijan, whereas we can get it directly from Iran, or we used to get it from Russia through Georgia.
Can I interject for a second? Like boss, like slave, because even the EU, Europe, is doing the same thing.
The same.
They're basically consuming
They're
Russian
getting the
gas.
Russian oil and Russian gas, but the oil as well. They are paying 3 times more for the same oil, being
to get it rebranded as Azeri oil.
rebranded as Azeri oil. So I think it's the same thing. So he's going to use it for the purposes of his campaigning. But there is another thing that made me think, given his last meeting with Putin and his request that he actually announced, gave an announcement before leaving for St. Petersburg, and then he kind of depicted it in his speech with Putin. The thing is that I think that he's trying to show as if it is beneficial for Russia as well to use the rail connection from Azerbaijan coming to Armenia, and then convince the Russian side to reconstruct the missing parts of Armenian railroad in the Kazakh area and the one connecting to Nakhichevan from Yeresk in the Yeresk part and also to Turkey. The thing is that in 2026, if I'm not mistaken, the right for the use of our Armenian railways for the Russian railways is coming to an end. So there should be either an extension or it should be put for the tender for whoever comes to manage it. So I think he's starting a trade with the Russian side, giving the understanding in a very indirect form that if you want your rights to be continued, to be extended, you should build this part of the missing rail, because this is part of also the existing railroad system. But don't even think about the southern part, the TRIPP. So this is kind of the carrot that he's trying to give to Russians. Also, not to oppose whatever being constructed and under what kind of conditions it is being constructed in the south of the country, bordering Iran. But I don't think the Russian side will give up his own intentions and interests that easily.
Yeah.
I think we'll see more vivid examples of the intentions coming out very soon, possibly after New Year holidays. So this as we say, the waters will clear and the real intent will be understandable very soon.
Dziunik, you mentioned TRIPP, so I want to actually add a few questions about that. The dispute over TRIPP, I think, highlights a direct clash between US and Russian versions of unblocking Armenia-Azerbaijan communications. Point number 9 of the November 10 statement from 2020 explicitly assigns Russian troops responsibility for control over transit routes through Armenia, a detail that Moscow reminds us from time to time. But despite us seeing Armenia go to Washington and sign these TRIPP agreement, so last week, Russian officials again said that they were ready to discuss participation in TRIPP, citing Russia's railway concession in Armenia, the presence of Russian border guards along much of the route, and Armenia's membership in the Eurasian Economic Union, which is an interesting factor to consider here because membership in the EAEU, gives some customs advantages to members, and it's unclear. It has been unclear to me how TRIPP would function within, going directly through the EAEU.
Yeah, you cannot
Anyway,
exempt one part of the country from the overall legislative framework that you are
yeah.
a member and you have committed to.
Yeah. So anyway, as you mentioned, Pashinyan pushed back, saying that TRIPP is a bilateral agreement between Armenia and the United States, and that any participation by third countries would be strictly discussed in that bilateral format. To me, that sounded like, F off Russia, but at the same time, Pashinyan said, like you mentioned, Pashinyan said it would be best if Russia would reconstruct these missing parts of the railroad. So I think that, from time to time we hear these issues rekindle, and we are reminded that there are interests, powerful interests at play here. How would you assess the sudden upgrade of at least Russian rhetoric in Armenian transport and communications, to date? What is your impression?
Well, I don't think there has been a change. I think there is just a persistence not to allow anything that will endanger the communication through Armenia of the Eurasian Economic Union from Russia to Iran, from north to south, be put in place, because that will be devastating for both countries and for the union as a whole. And I'm not even mentioning Armenia. Armenia has benefited from this union tremendously, and it will just go back into the dark ages if something happens to this membership. The thing is that this was the main intent in the beginning when this person was brought to power in Armenia, to push Russia out of the region and put the whole region under the Western control, having the East-West communication fully under the control of the Western companies, so that they could hold also get hold of the resources coming from Central Asia to Europe, and also cut the possible connection from China, or at least put this connection under the full control of the Western companies. So this is something that has been in the beginning, and they are currently trying to fulfill through TRIPP. The understanding that the Armenian side is manipulating the Russian and the Iranian leadership, simply gaining time for the implementation of this project, is coming to many of the leaders in these countries. And now they are openly speaking about that. If several months ago, when this was signed, they wanted to believe that this would really be some kind of a communication and not a corridor, the way we understand it. Now they are coming to the understanding that they have been lied to, and whatever is being prepared with all these very secretive arrangements that is not being pronounced in the public is not to the benefit, or at least is not going to risk the security and the connection from north to south. And it has more military political purposes rather than trade and economic purposes. So, as I mentioned, Pashinyan is giving Putin something to say that if you want to get and stay engaged in the Armenian communication lines, then just simply repair and these missing parts of our railway system, but you're not going to see the southern part, because that's what he has been brought to power for. As for the November 9 statement, the first part of it had a totally different intention, and it was stating that all communication lines should be opened. And after that, there will be something connecting Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan under the border control of the Russian Federation. Not the full control of the communication, but under the border control, the same way we have had the border control units for example, in Zvartnot airport that Pashinyan removed last year, or in different border control sectors. So this is something that they could not have allowed, because it would have meant increasing Russian influence, or at least making their presence more stable. but the purpose was to remove them from the region. So I hope that their intention and the project will not move very fast, though the British especially are pushing for it very eagerly. But let's wait and see. The main development will be coming in the coming 2-3 months.
Ambassador, when you say that they're trying to delay and they're trying to gain time, what are they waiting for? What are the main events in 2026 that would keep them delaying like this? Is it the elections? Is it the end of the railroad agreement with Russia?
All elements are in place. They are not working transparently in bringing to public the information about the real arrangement that the TRIPP will be operating on, because that will be hurting Pashinyan's position in the elections. Also, it will increase the resistance coming from Russia and Iran with unexpected consequences. So this is all working together as one package. The Western side wants it move quickly, and I think that's why they are still thinking of extraordinary elections that would gain some time for them and ensure that if Pashinyan is reelected, then their positions are safe, and whatever comes out, he can justify by the public vote. And no matter that the public might give vote to a totally different agenda than he fulfills, as we have seen from the 2021 elections. So I think that's why I'm saying his actions against the church, his actions putting all the possible leaders of public resistance or opposition into jails or having criminal cases instigated against them is simply to neutralize the opposition field and have some kind of a public feeling of hopelessness that would not allow the public to go to the polling stations, and that will increase his chances also for being reelected. All this is playing together. There are too many elements, but they are all worked out together.
Superpower interests are a big deal. Do you have any confidence that Pashinyan's government has the wits to balance them all?
No, he's just following the instructions he's getting from the Western mentors. Of course, he's trying to safeguard his own body physically, but he's mainly following the instructions he's getting from his mentors.
Okay, well, let's wrap up the topics then. I do want to ask each of you if you have any thoughts you would like to share with our listeners. Hovik, what's on your mind?
Just a minor comment. I just yesterday, 168 AM published on their YouTube channel an interview with Father Serob Azaryan. I believe that's the name. Um, I think he had one time he lives in the territory in the Western Diocese region,
He's in Las
and
Vegas, I think.
yeah, and he had a few interesting comments to say about Archbishop Hovnan Derderian. And the main comment that he made was the Archbishop must explain his stance publicly. And to me, that silence from the Archbishop has been deafening because his name or his signature has been purported to be on the list of those 10 bishops and archbishops who have demanded the Catholicos' resignation. I don't think after that, he has publicly said anything. I mean, he has tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Armenians as part of his flock, and it's just astounding to me why no one has, with respect, asked the Archbishop, to further explain his stance and his motivations for signing that statement. If he didn't, then a denial of that. So Archbishop, Your Holiness, with respect, I want to ask you, please explain yourself and We would love to have, of course, the Archbishop on our podcast, but in the absence of that, I'm sure one way or another, my request will be translated to the Archbishop, if not directly, if he's not watching directly. But in any case, I would hope that other Armenians who attend service, who see or interact with the Archbishop, can pose that question to him directly as well.
Okay, we'll put the link to that YouTube video in the show notes, podcast.groong.org/episode number. Ambassador, do you have any thoughts you would like to share with our listeners?
Last Sunday, when I saw these people climbing up the doors of St. Etchmiadzin, it was very painful for me. It was like a shot into my heart, and it reminded me similar situation when, for the first time ever in 2016, group organized by some people trying to show support to the actions of Sasna Tsaresh, and they were climbing up the door of the embassy, and they left curses and vandalized the door. And it was led by somebody called Tej Armen, and I'm not surprised to see him in the leading positions currently within those attacking the church. So it is like, both the embassy is a sacred place for your own community people, as also it is protected internationally. But the church is a spiritual heaven. And when you see this kind of a disregard, and this is a very soft word for that, towards your own sanctities, it's really painful. But then you remember that that's the main purpose, to break all red lines, be it physical or be it moral or psychological, so that they can just break you as a person, break you as an individual, and break you as an Armenian. And that gives you the understanding that you should simply stand in support of your values, understand them, cherish them, and also explain to people what is the real purpose of this kind of actions, and not allow the manipulation to reach its goal. So I think this is very painful, but I think the understanding comes also from this pain, what the real purpose of those actions are.
Ambassador, as this is our final conversation of 2025, we wish you a happy new year despite all of the bad news we've had in this year, and a holy Christmas. Shnoravor Nordari Evsur Tsanunt.
Merry
May
Christmas and
2026
Happy
be
New Year
better.
to our listeners too.
Absolutely.
And I hope 2026 is really brings a breakthrough towards a more really peaceful and valuable year in understanding humanity and the main purpose why we humans are brought to this world, actually.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, Merry
Take care.
Christmas and Happy New Year, Happy Holidays to everyone, and especially our listeners as well who are celebrating maybe Christmas right now, because we're recording this on Christmas, U.S. Christmas Eve. So
For you. For
Peace,
me, it's the 23rd still.
peace
Oh,
and
okay, yes.
happiness to all.
Yes.
Yes.
That was our week in review. We recorded it on December 23rd for me here in Pacific time zone, and December 24th for Hovik in Yerevan time zone.
Well, it's only a few hours away from Christmas Eve for you anyway. So
Yeah.
once again, Merry Christmas to all those who celebrate at this time.
Yes.
And thanks. This was an interesting show.
So we've been talking with Miss Dziunik Aghajanian, who has served Armenia through the ranks of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, and most recently as a diplomat, as Armenia's ambassador to such countries as the Netherlands, Malaysia, Indonesia, She received her education at Yerevan State University, Columbia University in New York, and Uppsala University in Sweden. For more information on everybody, you can check podcasts.groong.org/episode number. Click on the people. You'll find that.
And don't forget to support us, folks, whether it's by liking, commenting, sharing, and by all means, if you haven't subscribed to us yet, then what are you waiting for? Please do that.
Don't wait for 2026. Do it now. Do it
Yes,
now.
yes. And maybe even financially, if you're, as the year comes to an end and you're tallying your losses and your gains, if your gains are a little more than what you had expected, then send some our way. Why not? Podcasts.groong.org/donate, and we will be very appreciative. I think, it goes to a great cause and it helps us increase our reach. So if you support that, then help us out as well.
Yeah. We can say Merry Christmas, but Hovik, we have one more show planned at this moment in the books with, I think we are going to talk with Benjamin Bedrossian to do our traditional year-end review and predictions for 2026 in a few days. So we'll bid everybody.
This is Merry American Christmas, and then the Armenian Christmas, for those who are not aware, is on January 6th. So obviously, but many Armenians in the United States celebrate both. Why not?
The more, the merrier. So
Yes.
we will
Merry
bid
Christmas.
everybody a Happy New Year in our next show. Take care, everyone.